purpose of this video is to allow you the right information to assess and inspect our product so we can properly validate whether the issues that you're having are a manufacturing issue, a finishing issue, or an installation issue. And based on that diagnosis, we can make the right recommendation of how to move forward and get you the right solution to your product. The first thing that must be looked at is what is the overhang of the door? The overhang is simply what protects the door. Our warranty is the overhang must be half the distance of the door height. So if you have a door here that is, let's say, 6'8", the overhang to properly protect the door should be half of that distance. One of the next steps to look at is the door properly sealed? That is important because if the door's not properly sealed, you're dealing with wood, and wood moves. As we all know, wood moves in width. To properly inspect that the door is painted or sealed, step up and inspect the top of the door. In cases where it's an 8-foot door, it may be almost impossible to do a step stool. You may have to have a mirror or a ladder. But what you're looking for is making sure that the top of the door is sealed. Why that's important is because you have end grain, and where there's end grain, water can come in and create a lot of additional expansion and contraction. If you run your hand across the top where the stile meets the rail, if there's any movement, this plane will not be perfectly smooth. If it isn't smooth, that means the door is moving. Your rail will move in width, so your rail will move this way and your stile would move this way. Hence, it's the rail that would generally be either above or below your stile. In this case, everything's perfectly smooth. Both sides, I check both sides. And another reason why the overhang is important is because if you have absolutely no overhang and you don't seal the top of the door, you could have water coming right in and going where this is unfinished and going right into the wood. So in this case, it's finished on the top. To do the same thing on the bottom, what may need to be done is to actually, in this case, we have what's called a sweep. And what you would have to do is to get down and pop this off a little bit and just make sure it's sealed at the bottom. Which in this case, lots of times you can just rub your finger. If it's sealed, it'll be very smooth. If it's not sealed, it'll be rough, just like normal raw wood. In this case, the door has been properly sealed, all 6 sides. Once you know you have a door that's been properly finished, the next thing to look at is how are the reveals. A door reveal is defined as the gap between the door and the jamb. So you have a vertical reveal going up through here where the door shuts against the jamb. You have a horizontal reveal for where the top of the door is. Is the reveal consistent from the top to the bottom on both the verticals and the horizontal? I wouldn't worry about the bottom, I'd only worry about those 3 sides. One of the most common things to think about is our doors are very heavy. And since they're heavy, when they're installed, there's additional things that need to be taken place to help secure that door from sagging. If a door is sagging, what you'll commonly see is at this top hinge, you'll see that the gap here is bigger than the gap at the bottom. In this case, it's fairly consistent, but on a door that's, let's say, an 8-foot door, a 368 door, where you're getting a door that's maybe 150, 200 pounds, that's where you'll see this gap get bigger because it'll be sagging. What you would need to do at that point is have the builder put a longer screw behind the hinge so that holds this frame and door in place and allows the door to function properly. The next point to look at is with the door shut, like we have now, is to look at, is the door shut on an even plane with the jamb? The reason that's important is lots of times when the strike plate is installed, that the door has some looseness to it. And one of the common things is that looseness might cause such things as daylight or air. And what you want to make sure is that the door is flush with the jamb. In this case, this door, if you ran a straight edge across, you can see is protruding in probably almost 1/8 of an inch. Now that 1/8 of an inch, or maybe not quite 1/8, if the door is perfectly straight and square, is going to fall all the way up through the top of the door. A simple thing is just to adjust the strike plate so that the door would be on the same plane. And to do that, the builder can adjust the strike plate. It might be a matter of moving the strike plate out so it'll be in, if you will, so that pulls the door in. And when it does that, it brings everything perfectly straight. One of the most common things we see is there might be a gap at the top. This door doesn't have, but the door is a 1/4 inch, and everybody thinks that the door is warped. But you might have a heavy 1/8 here at the strike plate. Well, when you do that, you adjust that. Now that where you think the door is warped, it's really not warped. It's just the door is falling the same as what it has at the strike plate. The next step to look at is your frame square? You have a square door, you need to have a square frame, and the combination of those two allow your door to function properly. So the next thing we encourage is to have a 6-foot level. This one is right around 6 foot, maybe a little taller, and be able to place that level on the jamb to confirm that the jamb is square in the opening. So what we would do is you'd take the level and basically put that right against the frame, and you'd want to make sure that level, proved that the frame was square. In this case, it looks like it's right dead on, if you will. Do that on one jamb, and then you would want to do that on the corresponding jamb leg, if you will. That way you're confirming that both jamb legs are square in the opening. It's hard to see right here, but it is right in the middle, so the jamb is square. Now that you've measured that your frame is square, make sure that your opening is consistent in width from top to bottom. We recommend measuring at the top, middle, and bottom. All right, this one's right at 36 on the top. We would go do the same thing at the middle and at the bottom, making sure that you're measuring from wood to wood. The next point to confirm square is to measure diagonal to diagonal. We'd probably recommend doing this with a second person in the field. Have somebody hold the tape for you. And what you want to do is measure your measurements and do one, and then do your other one. In this case, the measurement is right on. Once you measure it and you find that it's not diagonally consistent from one to the other, what you need to do is reassess your jambs, because something must be out of square. So to redo that means that something needs to be done with your jambs, so that way you can recreate that jamb opening to be square, which may mean you need to undo the screws securing the jamb to the stud and reset them. The next step is to take that same level and put that level right on the door stile. And to do that, just either have the door open or whatnot. You basically just put that's why the 6-foot level is nice, because you can get almost the whole height of the door with that level. And you basically put that level right against the door stile, and then look and assess. I'll try to open this up here so we can look at it. Then look in how close and how accurate. You can see this door is very close to, when you look here, very close to level. If the door is warped, first of all, it's probably not going to be nice and dead center like this. You're also going to see that there'd be a gap in between where the level meets your door edge, which this door is pretty straight. There's no gap. The next thing is put the level on a diagonal, not put an extreme amount of pressure on, just enough to hold the door against it, and make sure that it's touching top to bottom. If there's a big gap in between, that could be another thing that's assessing, and that would be where your rails, instead of your stile being warped, your rail would be cupped. And that would mean that you'd almost have like a curved door, if you will. The next thing to do is to measure the width of the door. The side to measure the width of the door on is the hinge side. To know the hinge side is just with the door shut. If you can see the hinges, that is the hinge side. When measuring the door width on the hinge side, you can measure all three, top, middle, and bottom. They all should be consistent, because because it's all done at the factory. However, one side is actually wider than the other. The hinge side is actually wider than the other side because the door has a bevel on the strike edge to allow the door to shut properly. So we would encourage to measure on the hinge side, the door width, and just confirm that that width is consistent from top to bottom. Now, why are we measuring the width? You basically have one rectangle for the jamb opening, and you have a door that's a rectangle. You're putting one rectangle inside of another rectangle. The reason you're measuring the door width is to make sure that rectangle sits inside your jamb width. Typically, your reveal, remember we started with reveals in this discussion, the reveal should be around 1/8 of an inch on both sides, meaning let's call it the strike side, as well as the opposite on the hinge side. The summation of those two reveals in width should be almost 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit less than that, but right around 1/4 of an inch. So if your jamb opening, hypothetically, was 36 inches, your door should be around 35 3/4, 35 13/16. If you measure your door and the door is 36 inches, it's way too tight, which would mean that your reveals are way too tight as well. And that the door probably had expanded in the field through humidity or not being sealed, and you'd probably also see that at the same point with movement at the top of the door. The next thing to look at, remember one of our original comments was air, light, so on and so forth, is to make sure the weather stripping is properly installed and covers all the needed areas. When you're looking at the weather stripping, this is a rabbited jamb, has a Q-line weather stripping. One of the most common things we see is as you go across where the horizontal meets the vertical, we'll see cases where there's a gap there. Maybe the weather stripping slid down or moved. If there is, then the weather stripping needs to be moved back up, or you need a new piece of weather stripping. I would follow this all the way around your opening, and the most common area is actually at the bottom. And make sure your weather stripping goes all the way to the very bottom point where it meets the sill. And in addition to that, you do that on both sides. Goes right to the bottom. And included with your shipping package, there would also be what's called these are actually an Endura corner pad, and they're actually beveled. And what they do is they bevel and they follow the bevel of the door, and make sure that these are installed as well. Because what these do is actually they help with water as well as light and everything that goes in between. The next issue to look at is the machining of the hinges. The machining of the hinges is the machining of the hinge on the door as well as the machining of the hinge on the jamb. Is the hinge recessed or is it protruding out? If your hinge is recessed, you'll probably have a door that is binding more at the hinge. If it is sticking out from the jamb, you're probably going to have a bigger reveal at your hinge side and a tighter reveal on your strike side. There is such things as swage on hinges, which is what the gap is when the hinges are completely flush with the jamb. Different hinges have different swage, so we have assessed that as a manufacturer and have adjusted whether the hinge is protruding out or in based on the swage of the hinge. If you want your reveal smaller on the hinge side, then your hinges need to be machined deeper so they go in more. If you want a bigger gap on your hinge side, simply put a hinge shim behind your hinge to kick the hinge out from the jamb or the door respectively. If you do this and you want this done consistently from top to bottom, it should be done on all hinges. If you only want to do it at the top or the bottom, then just do one. Sometimes people I see in the field, they'll try to modify where the door is sagging by doing it through the hinge versus doing the right thing by putting the longer screw and making the door square in the opening. In summary, these are the many steps that can be done relatively quickly while you're in the field. Once you've done these steps, and as while you're doing them, it is important to have certain pictures being taken. We would recommend a picture of a close-up as well as a picture of the door with the reveals, things like that, weather stripping, one close-up and one maybe from a distance far enough that we can see the whole door, so it's not just one small little point. If we're talking about the overhang, take a picture from a little bit of a distance so we can see the overhang and how the door is being protected.